I know everybody kind of tiptoes around money in publishing because it's kind of not the done thing, but I feel like 99% of the conversations I have are about money.
Hey y'all, it's 2024 and welcome to another You May Contribute a Verse. Team Versey is Brenna, Jenna, author and outdoors mom, John Seymour, podcast wizard and headmaster of Tealmore Press, and me, Josh Munkin, science communicator, dad, and author who is definitely going to sort out a Kidlit Writers Guild in his free time. Steph Campisi has a lot of irons in the fire, but not so many that she couldn't make a bunch of time for an incredible conversation recorded last May. And boy, a lot has happened since then, both for Steph and for the world. Our chat with Steph covers a lot of what I particularly admire about her: tenacity, dedication, passion, acumen, creativity, and openness to approaching the world with the swagger and bravado perhaps befitting a Marvel superhero. Seems to be working out for her just fine. You'll gather as much from our chat, but it certainly seems like contracts and negotiations are an ongoing consideration requiring constant attention. If you haven't checked out Steph's work, please do, in particular Quacks Like a Duck and Lewis and Tabitha, both of which are discussed at various points in this chat and for very different reasons. Happy New Year. Here is Stephanie Campisi's verse.
Well, just for people listening, so this is You May Contribute a Verse. I'm Brenna Jenna. This is Josh Munkin, my co-host. And we're here with Steph Campisi. Is that how you say your last name?
Campisi.
Oh, I got it. Awesome.
Right. It's like I own a caravan business. Campisi.
Oh, I love that. Campisi. Oh my gosh. We may already have the title of this podcast.
Steph Campisi's caravan business. You have a clear, I think more importantly, you have a clear fallback in case this writing thing doesn't work out for you.
Exactly. And I have some doppelgangers. I met a named doppelganger the other day as well. So I can always just like slide into somebody else's life. I was at this book festival and this couple came up to me and they were like, "Are you Steph Campisi from the Bronx?" And I was like, "I'm very clearly not Steph Campisi from the Bronx."
Yeah, right. Let me just say anything and you'll realize I am not from the Bronx.
And they were just looking at me. I was like, well, surely you would know if I was the Steph Campisi that you would know, but apparently not. So I'm very interchangeable. I can just be other Steph Campisis at will if I need to be. So there you go.
I mean, is that your next book? I feel like that would be a great book. Like if you could just slide into all of the other Steph Campisis of the world.
There are a few. I've had like a Steph Campisi email me, so there's definitely like a thing going on. like our named doppelgangers are like, traveling the world looking for each other.
Yeah.
But usually I'm called Sam. People come up to me and ask if I'm Sam everywhere I go. So
really?
I think there's definitely a creepy book in that.
Yes, definitely. How weird. Different
back
people
home,
calling you Sam.
I guess I look like a Sam. Yeah. There you go, Sam or Steph Campisi from the Bronx.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, let's talk about books.
That feels appropriate.
That's the whole point. Not caravan.
Right. So, okay, so first of all, so we are all on the Discord channel together, thanks to Nathan's amazing work
Shout
with
out
that.
PB
and
Workshop.
A shout out to
That's
him.
right.
And if anyone is listening and you want... Yeah, PB Workshop. Oh my gosh. If anyone's listening, though, and you want to join and get involved, we'll put a link in the show notes because it's a great resource for writers. Anyway, so we're all in there, and I have seen you on there recently talking about like just getting like great news. Like you've been, I think, like some work for hire stuff, and then you got an email like requesting that you like help with this like project, and I was like, I want to know more about all of that when we talk to you. So if we could start with that, that'd be cool.
Let's start with the good news. Well, I've got to say, like 99% of the time, it is bad news. I just don't talk about that.
Right. I mean,
hide in a corner. So when there is good news, fake it till you make it, right?
That's when you go to the squat rack in the garage.
Exactly. Yes, that's right. I max out my squat. Yeah.
Or you go camp easy somewhere.
Exactly. Well, I am in rural Tennessee at the moment, so there's lots of places to camp. I actually have had like a little bit of good news recently, which is nice because I mean, it has not been like an overnight thing by any means. I'm like the longest, slowest person on this writing journey ever, and everybody's always like, "Wow, you're such a case study in perseverance." I'm like, "Oh, great."
You're like, thanks, I guess.
Nobody wants to be that like, perpetual failure, but that is me. So it's nice. I think I'm a case study in just like dogged determination. Like I think if you just hang in there long enough, potentially a lot of people drop off and you're the last man, last girl standing, and that's kind of what you have to be. So that is me, relentless like the Terminator. And bit by bit you do start to get good news. So yeah, I have a few things in the works, and I can only talk about in that really weird like oblique publishing way. There are some book-shaped things coming to
book-shaped things.
Stock books sometime in the next 10 years.
Nice, yeah.
But yeah, so I have a few things on the go. Next year, it looks more exciting than it is just because things have been shifted around due to COVID and stuff. So I have quite a few books launching next year, like 7 or 8 books or something.
God,
but that's mostly...
Oh my
thing. It didn't all happen at once. I didn't just sell like 7 books all at once. They were all shuffled around, and it's quite a daunting year.
So let's like back up and unpack that just a little because 7 or 8 books. I mean, yeah, anyone who's just like happening upon you is going to be like, holy crap, like she just, woke up and like sold 8 books. But, I mean, obviously if you're a writer, like everybody knows that's probably not true. But can you tell us like where it started, like how your writing journey sort of progressed and how you got to this point?
Absolutely. I mean, for anyone listening, I would love to sell 7 or 8 books all at once. Please come and find me. I would love to do that. But yeah, so I started off writing middle grade novels, and my first one, I don't know if this is going to make you feel better or worse, my first one went out on submission in I think 2012, it might have been 2011, died on submission. I quit writing for a little bit. Came back in a few years later with another novel that went out on sub, died on submission. I quit writing for a little bit, wrote another novel. And then I was just like, you know what, I'm going to start writing picture books. So I wrote some picture books. I actually sold one to a small press relatively quickly, which was a surprise because all of my efforts to that point had just failed miserably. And so that came out with a small press and did pretty well. I got pretty good reviews, and then nothing else happened, and all of my books got rejected, and I got dumped by my agent and all that fun stuff. And I was at the point.
I was going to say, what was your debut, and what was the press, and what was the year?
It was The Ugly Dumpling, which is a retelling of The Ugly Duckling, and it came out through a small press called Mighty Media in Minneapolis. They do wonderful books, and they did a great job promoting it, like a very small press, but with a very big reach. They did a really good job. And then, so that came out, and I was like, yes, I'm kind of doing this. And then it kind of got to the point where it had been several years, and I had this kid reach out to me. They were doing a writing and publishing program, and they were like, can I interview you? And there was like a last minute thing. They were like, it's due in an hour. And I was like, sure, I'll help you out. And I was at that point, I was like, I'm never going to sell another book ever again. Like I just kind of accepted that. And then literally a week later, I saw my book Lewis and Tabitha, which came out with Holly Mengett. I think it was like 3 years after The Ugly Dumpling. I think it was 2018. It actually moved pretty fast when it came out. And so I had a little bit of a relationship with that publisher after that. They asked for a few more books, and bit by bit I was kind of working my way in there. Meanwhile, still trying to sell novels. They all died on submission, and I kept getting dropped by my editors or my agents, or they'd quit the business. So there was lots of crying in a corner. But then last year, like I sort of had like a little bit of momentum going. Like I was selling to like smaller presses, with the books ended up being beautiful, and I'm very happy with how they've done. But I was like, okay, I need to do this. I either need to make this happen, or I just need to accept that it's not going to happen. So I did a thing last year where I was like, this is my year of being shameless. And I was so shameless. I'm so sorry to everybody. I was very shameless. I was like, what would a guy on the internet do? And because I'd seen all these guys on Twitter be like, hey, I want $1 million book deal. And they would get one. And I'd be like, well, I could do that, surely. And then I remember that, and it was kind of inspired by that. And then this interview I read ages and ages ago with Neil Gaiman, how he was basically like, fake it till you make it. And he pretended that he'd written for all of these publications and so on. But there came a point where he had written for all of them. And he'd been doing it for so long and persisted for so long that, well, I mean, he's Neil Gaiman, that he, was doing the thing. And so I work as my day job is as a copywriter. So I've kind of worked on probably some stuff you've heard of, but in like kind of like a publishing adjacent kind of niche. And that's a secret, and I can't talk about any of that, of course.
Of course. Secret agent.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm pretty confident, I think, in my ability to write, less confident in my ability to sell stuff. But so, yeah, last year I was like, I'm going to put my hand up for stuff. I'm going to put my name out there. And so I saw some calls for submissions, some calls for work for hire projects. And I was like, me. Put my hand up for everything, audition for stuff. Applied to write books. So we're sort of an existing series as well that one of my publishers was putting out. And I was like, why not? This is a great series. Maybe I can add to this. And so that kind of went through. I landed a 3-book chapter book series through that. A middle grade fantasy novel that is now being I can't talk about that anymore.
I'm going to rename this episode the Didactic Podcast episode with Steph Campisi. It's like all blacked out and bleeped.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
We'll bleep everything.
It's not your fault. It's publishing's fault because everything moves so slow. No, it's
exactly. It's like everything's redacted. Sorry, this is all just blanked out. Even my name.
Yeah, right.
So little bit by little bit, people started saying yes to stuff. Like the majority of the time, they say no still because that's publishing for you, and fair enough. Not everything is the right fit for every house or for every editor, and not every project is as strong as every other project or as timely or whatever. But yes, year of being Shameless worked out relatively well. It was exhausting, absolutely exhausting. Like I worked 7 days a week till 10:30 every night last year. It was a lot, so I don't know that I would be quite as much of a go-getter this year. I definitely have backed off a little bit, but it was kind of cool. It was kind of cool to be able to say, I'm going to do this thing and then really commit to doing it and then kind of seeing some of it like come to fruition.
And you have, I mean, we've already talked about at least a toddler. You've got a couple of kids, right? Relatively little kids.
No, just the one, but he feels like a couple. Yeah. I have a Jack Russell as well.
I feel that. And a Jack Russell, yeah. That's
I thought you were saying your toddler was the Jack Russell.
So
he's got the energy.
Sometimes it's hard to tell. They're both like a blur, so they run around the house, and I can't.
Yeah, right. Which is which? Who knows?
Exactly.
But I mean, acknowledging that's a lot to manage. I've talked about this before, and I've got 2 kids, 9 and 6, and I mean, it's draining in the best way possible because you're parenting and leaving it all in the field. Mm-hmm. But kudos for committing to the hustle. That's amazing. I'm curious, how, like what proportion of the leading up to the year of get out there like a man was agented versus that's a slightly odd. That's a slightly odd turn of phrase.
Weird title. Yeah.
We can replace the caravan thing with get out there like a man.
Get out there. We'll have stickers. If that business gets off the ground and the podcast and we team up, we could make stickers. That's great. I love that one. Get out there like a man.
I don't know.
You can have like a little blank and you can just like insert your descriptor of choice. There we
go. The question that I meant to send that I distracted with my poor choice of words is how much of the the small press, like the editor relationships and things that you had built over those couple of years, how much of that was agented versus unagented? Because you said you'd come and gone with agent relationships a couple of times, and then also, your relationships with editors in particular had led to like the chapter book series deal and so on.
So I'm nodding quite knowingly at the camera, very thoughtfully at the camera. So I think in all of those years, I sold 1 book directly through the agented submission approach. And pretty much everything else was either something that I literally saw a call for on Twitter and auditioned for and put my hand up through for, or was a direct submission. So I did have like an agent in my corner to help out with contracts when we got to the contract stage. thankfully, because I only have half a brain at the moment with the toddler and the Jack
Yeah.
Russell and the day job and all of that. So I need somebody smarter than me to work on that side of things. But I think those relationships played a huge role, to be honest. And I know it's very easy to mock Twitter because it is Twitter. But I think it's been really valuable for me, helping to like grow relationships with people and connect with people. I'm obviously a foreigner and come from a pretty small but fairly close literary community back home. But when I moved here, knew nobody. Obviously, didn't go to school in New York or LA or anything like that.
Or the Bronx.
Yeah, or the Bronx. Shout out to Steph Campisi. So I knew nobody, and I kind of lived in rural areas. Like I was in rural South Washington State, and now I'm in rural Tennessee, and so there kind of hasn't been an opportunity to like connect with people or get in front of people. So, as much as I hate to give Twitter some cred, like it's been really, really good for building those relationships. And now we have kind of the Discord thing going as well, and that's been great. But yeah, I think just all those years of refreshing my Twitter feed,
Right.
Just of gradually like chatting with people and seeing what they acquire and the kind of writing styles that would appeal to people and the projects and so on, like all of that stuff kind of over time. And I am really fortunate to have a pretty solid working relationship with Familius, which is a small press. They're based out of California, and they've done a bunch of my picture books, and I love them and couldn't recommend them more. They're just wonderful. So that has been really, really great as well.
So, okay, so I have a couple of questions. So recently on Discord, there was a question posted about agents and how they submit things or if and when they will submit things. For instance, so for people listening or just to orient, so sometimes when you go to conferences or webinars or whatever, you get submission opportunities, right? If you are agented, there's always a question about, okay, how do I submit to them? Do I submit my, on my own behalf and then just, copy my agent and let him know, which is that's my situation. My agent is like, yeah, that's fine. If you come across those and you want to submit, go ahead. Let me know, loop me in. Or some agents say, no, don't submit yourself. Everything should go through me. I will submit on your behalf and say, you were at this conference, you have this opportunity, whatever. So based on that question, or just that premise and those differences of submission, how was that for you? Were you agented at the time, and was your agent like, yeah, totally, like go and do, go and submit, or were you not agented, or how did that work?
So I was agented at the time, but kind of did those independently. My agent checked over my submission because we had to like audition for a few projects, and they gave me the go ahead, and then kind of stepped aside and then came back in when it was contract stage and everything. The conference thing is kind of interesting, and I think it would really depend on who you are, where you are in your career, and the kind of project you are trying to sell. I think there are definitely situations where you're like, yes, this is the perfect person for this project, or I would like to build like a lengthy career with this person and would like to build a relationship with them. And then it might make sense to kind of have that face-to-face connection, and the beginning of that relationship with them. It might be a little bit different if you're going out with like a really hot property where you're expecting, a 15 house auction and 7-figure sale and all of that sort of stuff. Then which none of my books will ever do that. And then your agent might have, a different kind of strategy there. So I think if you are in that situation, I feel like whenever I say there's going to be people on Twitter saying that's terrible advice.
Oh gosh, I did, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just for conversation's sake, you know what I mean? Because there's so many different strategies.
I think it would depend on your game plan. Yeah, I think if you did have a really hot property, it might be better to I would definitely check with an agent if you're agented and just see what their insights are. Like they might just say, hey, you're better off just chatting with an editor, like using that time to chat with an editor versus like pitching a project. And then that way they can get to know you and what else you're working on as well. And you get a better sense of who they are. But it kind of depends. Like I personally would go for it because why not?
Right. That's sort of my feeling as well. And I'm glad that my agent is sort of on board with that too. I mean, like you're saying, depending on the project, yeah, like there are some that I wouldn't just like throw out into the wind and just see what happens. But I like some of these conferences I signed up for, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right, like I have this submission opportunity, awesome. So I remember talking to my agent and just being like, hey, like, is this cool if I submit to these, or like should I not do that? Should I send them through you? And he was like, no, that's that's totally fine. Like, and most of the projects that I was submitting are things that he had already seen, we already had a pitch for. So it was basically just like, me taking advantage of the opportunity and just sending it out, as opposed to like, adding like a middleman, so to speak, and sending it through my agent and then like in a roundabout way, which I don't necessarily think one is not, one is worse or one is better or whatever. I happen to be kind of a like anxious person about like like I want to say yes to all the stuff, just like what you're saying. And so I'm like, yeah, if I have an opportunity, like I don't want to just be like, oh yeah, opportunity, like whatever, like it's like who cares. I want to be like, yes, like let me submit something, because who knows, that could be the yes, so
Absolutely. I'm also a highly anxious person, so.
Right? I'm like, submit all the stuff. Like, yeah, like somebody will say yes. I mean, it's a numbers game,
What
right?
a great business for both of you to be in.
I know. Fear of rejection.
It's kind of soul crushing.
With like lack of communication. I'm like, it's the perfect industry for me. Yeah, so definitely not an impatient person. It's
right. Right. Totally fine with like heaps of rejections. Like I love them.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. I'm building like a paper mache house out of mine. Yes. But yeah, I'm the same. I think if there's an opportunity, like why not? It can't hurt. I mean, assuming you're like comporting yourself as like a professional and you're not sliding manuscripts under a bathroom door or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, yeah, like all of my stuff is vetted. It's not like I'm just sending stuff out and my agent hasn't seen it and it's like like a first draft or something. It's not, you know what I mean? It's like these are like strategized, like well thought out pieces. It's just I have an opportunity and it's like, yeah, just go ahead and send it. And I guess on the flip side, I understand also why agents are like, no, I would like everything to go through me, because then they have a handle on what's going out, what was said, they're in the loop, they're whatever. Like I get that too. So
absolutely, yeah. So I think sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, not to be too sort of labely about it, but going back to this notion of agents as gatekeepers, this is more a function of an agent being like a collaborator than anything. Like, yes, go through me because I've got the relationships and I know how to sort of grease these wheels. But again, Steph, to your point, like if you're comporting yourself like a professional, you know what you're doing and you've got it vetted, why not put the trust in you? I mean, it's doing part of the agent's work, but it's also, it's empowering you to get out there and spread your voice around.
And also, I mean, at the end of the day, it's your work and it's your writing, right? Like your your intellectual property. And so if you want to submit it, I feel like you should be able to submit it. Not that there are agents out there being like, no, you can't submit stuff. It's just it's a different sort of like avenue, I guess, to explore. So
absolutely, I think like with probably like the caveat that if you're already on submission and you might be submitting to like a competing imprint or something like that, like assuming there's nothing like that going on, which is why it's a good idea to talk with your agent if you are in that situation.
Totally.
I completely agree.
Totally. Yeah, like definitely like strategize first. Yeah, exactly. Like a competing house or something that you feel like is like definitely going to sell, and you want to make sure that it's going, to these houses that you want it to sell at, not just like, anybody out there. Yeah, to your point, like it's worth considering and definitely talking to your agent about it so everybody is on the same page. But whether or not you submit it or the agent submits it is again like down to sort of like your personal choice and I guess what you want for the project.
Exactly, like if it's a collaborative relationship. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing because I think it's very easy, I think particularly in recent years, to see the kind of publishing pathway as like write a book, query the book, get the agent, pitch the book,
right,
get the book contract, and it feels like very linear. But like maybe it's part of being like an Aussie and it's like a much smaller literary scene, and there are literary agents, but a lot of houses are open to authors submitting. It's obviously a much smaller pool of authors as well, so that's a bit more manageable. And it's also smaller, there's more access in a sense that you can go to like publishing drinks and like chat with people or publishing coffee or whatever. So there are kind of different ways in. And so I guess I was sort of looking at, well, what are the different opportunities to get my foot in the door that aren't necessarily that kind of linear pathway that kind of hasn't really worked for me. And I think part of that is because I have a very non-American writing style and approach that doesn't necessarily gel, and I'm with editors here, and it's kind of been a really interesting thing because I'm kind of like in this midway place where like I've lived in the US for 10 years, but I'm not American, but like I'm not Australian, so I'm just like this little alien floating around.
You're just Steph Campisi from Tennessee.
Exactly, from the Bronx or from wherever.
Yeah, this is my Tennessee accent. Can't you tell?
That's right. I'm from the deep south, actually, but yeah. So I think my idea was like, well, there are lots of other ways in, and like if you have a relationship or you have something that you can offer somebody, like why not use that? And I think there was a point where I just looked at like my copywriting portfolio and I was like, oh man, I've worked on some really cool stuff, like some nationwide ad campaigns with like famous properties that, you know, you've probably watched on TV or whatever. And you're like, oh, I've done this, like I can do this. So I think I got to a point where like between my writing and my copywriting that I was like, well, I'm not like a beginner anymore. I think I'm at a point where I can take this to the next step. And, you know, I've written full time as a copywriter for like 15 years now. So I think there was a point where I was like, oh, I am a professional. And it was just sort of weird. Like I did hit a point where I was like, oh, I have this confidence in my skills. And like, even if my books aren't necessarily selling, like I know that they're good enough to get an agent. They're good enough to go on submission. Like I think I hit a point where I had like a confidence in my writing, and I was like, okay, I just got to find my way to get the foot in the door and then into the next door, because there are lots of doors. You get through the first door and there's just like a kingdom of doors.
Yeah, right. There's just so many. Yeah.
Oh,
and the only problem is like
doors.
Which one? Yeah.
Feet. Yeah, steel capped boots, like to get through those doors.
This reminds me, I can't remember whether it was Twitter or Discord, but the exchange that we had around bringing himbo energy to publishing, which, you know, understand, it's not pure himbo, it's like understand how to unlock the door, or at least, you know, knock on it properly. But that's, I mean, I really like that point, and we've talked about this endlessly, and I always talk about how I don't talk about my day job that much, I guess, in specific terms, except I do.
He mentions it every podcast, I'm going to say.
Yeah, because, I mean,
amazing day.
Lord, now I hope that it's not obnoxious how much I talk about my day job.
No, I'm just teasing you because you always say, well, I don't talk about my day job that much, but that's how you always open the sentence.
I don't talk about them in a way that like they would get tagged in a thread, but like, but yeah. I like your point. Like well, maybe if you think only, or if I think only about the way that I write picture books, I'm not going to feel particularly confident because I don't have an agent. I don't have anything published. I've gotten things, you know, critiqued and taken to a done state, but, you know, I haven't seen anything through. But I mean, heck yes, like you, I've written things that appear on, you know, ad campaigns nationally, internationally, and I work for a, you know, global multinational corporation. That's not nothing. That's something that should fuel your confidence in yourself to say, you know, I can write to spec. I can write to, you know, specific requirements and be sensitive to my audience and
deadlines.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, make deadlines, etc. Yep.
Also, to your point, like I was speaking with Ebony a little bit ago, and something that she said, like, sort of like blew my mind a little bit. Like, it's just a mind shift, right? Like just shifting your perspective a little and realizing that you, like, if you're confident in your work and you believe in it and you think it can go out, and you're thinking about it in, you know, terms of like it actually being a book and how to market it and what it will look like at a book launch and what kids will do with it when they have it in their hands, right? If you have that long-term vision and you are committed to it and you know that it's good and you believe in yourself, like just that, I feel like can switch your whole mental perspective in terms of like, I can do this. Like I am doing this. This is happening. Like I spend, you know, X amount of hours a day thinking about writing, actually writing, you know, saying yes, opening the doors, like doing all the stuff, right? Like you are a writer, you are doing those things, and you can do it. You are doing it. So just that tiny like shift in your mindset, I feel like can be so just like rewarding. It can really open up a lot.
Absolutely. I love that I am doing this, because I see so many people and they're putting so much effort into their craft. They're doing all the right things, and like they're on their path, and they will get there as long as they continue doing what they're doing. It's a very slow industry, and it's not a linear industry, and there are different ways in. But yeah, exactly. You are a writer because you are writing and you're creating and you're doing all the things that you need to do. And I think, yeah, when you shift to that and you see yourself as like an author or a creative professional in, you know, whatever writing adjacent field you want to break into, versus the please pick me, that kind of approach,
Totally.
that almost feels like somebody's doing you a favor,
Right.
versus like, hey, here is my thing. This is a good book and people want to buy it, because people do buy books or films or music
Yeah.
or whatever, or they used to. You know, like that work is like the backbone of the industry. Like the industry wouldn't exist without it. And I think it's really easy for people to see that like publishing, yeah, is doing them a favor, that they've like picked them and they've made a dream come true. But it's like, no, they've made like a calculated business decision.
Yeah.
That like, this book is this, it will reach this audience, it will sell this many units, it will like provide this many jobs or whatever. And like they are making like a financial decision based on your work or you as an individual or whatever, or that whole package. It's not just like you're, you know, drawn out of like a lottery and they're like, yes, you get to have a book.
Totally. Yeah, like get rid of that, like that sort of like feeling or that motivation that comes from desperation, right? Like you were saying, like the pick me, because I feel like only bad decisions come from being, you know, from feeling desperate. And I'm not at all being judgmental about that. I've made several decisions for my own writing based on pure desperation, you know, and like please pick me, like please, you know, like do me this favor. And it's no, you're totally right. Like this is not a favor. It is, your work is good and it's, you know, speaking for itself and it's doing what it should be doing. And so they're not doing you the favor. You're the one who is, you know, creating the product that is going to be sold. So,
Hey, let's take a break for some mid-episode reviews and shout-outs. It is Maddie Frost Review Theme Week on the podcast. My review is for Wombats Go Camping, Maddie's first foray into early reader graphic novels in the vein of Narwhal and Jelly and a number of others. Unlike the first Narwhal and Jelly, though, the characters in Wombats spring fully formed from Maddie's brain and onto the page, taking a note from episodic cartoons that rely on familiarity and reread or rewatchability, in addition to the penchant of kids to pay little attention to series publication order. This book is a study in humor and pacing, and kudos in particular to the middle right panel of page 27, which is my favorite. He's gonna bite Pickles' butt. And you'll have to go read it if you want to understand more context of what I'm referring to. Brenna's preview for this week is for Wombats Go to Wizard's Wharf, which is out in February of this year, 2024, which Brenna and I have gotten a sneak peek at. Wizard's Wharf is the follow-up to Wombats Go Camping and features Pickles cashing in on an IOU to Albert from 4 years ago. Pickles wants to go to, you guessed it, Wizard's Wharf, and even though it's not Albert's idea of a good time, he goes along with it. Best friends with opposite personalities, a magical setting, and ridiculous antics make this graphic novel a perfect bridge, and actually the one before it as well. Perfect bridges for those readers graduating from picture books, and adults will love them too because they're hilarious with lots of toot onomatopoeias. Sadly, there are only 2 Wombats books so far, so John has the fortunate job of picking another doozy of a Frost original to review. John's review this week is Maddie's Capybara is Friends with Everyone, which I also love, which is also a clever tale that follows the world's friendliest animal, a capybara, in his attempts to be as friendly and helpful as possible to all of his 4,382 friends and counting. The story has bright and quirky illustrations, as expected from a Maddie Frost book, and covers lots of important SEL themes such as friendship, self-worth, and developing a better understanding of boundaries. It also cleverly highlights that while helping friends is always wonderful, one doesn't need to exhaust oneself in order to be or feel appreciated. Just being your wonderful self is always more than enough. One final note before we move on from reviews. It is my personal headcanon that Versey, our podcast mascot, who was conceptualized and illustrated by Maddie herself, exists within the WOMBATS universe. So if I'm not podcasting, you'll see me over on the side writing some fan fiction, inserting our little podcast mascot into his own Pickles and Albert adventure. And now on to a couple of shout-outs for the week. So it is our friend of the podcast, Steena Hernandez's theme week for shout-outs this week. So she's got a couple of things to offer. Shout-out to Steena's wonderful critique partner, Jessica Milo, who I also happen to think is wonderful, who recently signed with agent Wendy Gu at Greenberger Kids. Steena says, "I'm so excited for you. Congratulations, my friend." Congratulations, Jess. And to her CP and fabulous friend Jenna Johnson on her recent debut book deal announcement. Steena says, "So proud of you and can't wait for your book to be in the world." And finally, a huge shout out to this amazing, a huge shout out to this amazing podcast for featuring brilliant kidlit creators and for bringing so much light and joy to the writing community. Thank you for all the fun, says Steena, and thank you to the entire kidlit community for embracing what we're doing here. And thank you in particular to Steena for offering words of support to your fellow creators. If you have any shout outs that you would like to put in, please feel free to visit our Linktree, linktree.com/or linkter.ee/verse show to find where you can help support the podcast by sponsoring a shout out on the show. And one final edit in for me to mention something that I've never actually had to mention on this podcast before, which is, we've got a Patreon now. We just surprise soft launched this a couple of days ago as of publication of this episode, and we would love it if you would go and give our budding, fledgling little page a gander if you have a moment. You can find that on our Linktree as well. We are Verse Show on Patreon, and now, finally, back to Steph's verse. Thanks, y'all.
I was going to say, I love that notion about like making bad decisions based on desperation, because I think we've all made those decisions, and like they can be a learning experience where you go, well, at least now I won't do that again, or maybe I can warn other people not to do that same thing. But absolutely. And personally, like I know that so I'm unagented at the moment and I haven't been querying. If I do, I will be very selective. I think I will approach it in a very different way now from how I have in the past, because you're right. I kind of made similar decisions like throughout my career where I was like, oh, this is right here in front of me. I have this opportunity, and you leap at it because you really want this to happen for yourself because you've worked so hard for so long. And you're not necessarily making the right decision, or it might be the right decision in the short term, but not in the long term. And I think there is a point where you do need to start thinking about your career as a lifelong thing, not in like little bursts or not as book by book. Absolutely.
It's so hard to turn stuff down when someone finally says yes. Yeah, you're like, really? Like you're gonna say no now? Like what? Yeah, right. But
absolutely.
Say no. You have the power to say no.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How do you? I want to pull this apart because, I mean, I've got a vested interest in thinking about my own writing career this way, but it applies to a lot of other people as well who may just take the shotgun approach to cold querying as many people as possible. It is an approach that works for a lot of people, but how do you get to be selective? Like, how do you think when you get back to that state that you'll go about figuring out who to try and engage in this relationship with?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm working from the assumption that I get to be selective.
I mean, you do, right? That's the whole mindset shift, right? Like you do, Steph, exactly. You do.
So I feel like at this point it would be, if I didn't have an offer from somebody that I think would be the right fit, I would walk away versus accepting an offer because it's there. Whereas I think earlier in my career, I'd be like, yes, anyone, I'll take anyone.
Totally.
Right.
And I think that's a great question, particularly given there's obviously been a lot of capital D discourse going around, and the whisper networks are kind of going, and I personally been getting a lot of direct messages and things from people who are, not having a great time at the moment. And I think, publishing is in flux at the moment. Everybody's so overworked. Things are changing a lot and have been since COVID. And just, late stage capitalism is great. But I think it's a matter of, I think there's this sense that we look for the rock star, perfect fit, best agent when I think you might have a notion of what that might be, based on things that maybe aren't the best fit for you personally. So hang on, let me try to phrase this in a full sentence instead of just gibberish. I've only had 2 coffees, that's not enough for me. I do have some freshly roasted stuff here on the cabinet that I'm going to get into in a minute. So I think it's obviously a matter of who works in my genre and who I respect and has sold books to publishers that I've heard of recently, and sells books that I like. Do they work in the style that I want? Do I want somebody who is editorial or not, who's just like a sales pro? What kind of communication do I want? And for me, I think a big thing is, like, I've kind of chatted to a few people about their experiences. I think I would probably go the referral route this time, talk to my friends who have agents that they're happy with. And I think at this point say, hey, I have this project, would they be interested in taking a look at it? I think getting the perspectives of people, who you trust and respect as well, I think is really important. You might, because there are some agents who are great for certain clients, but might not be a good fit for other clients. Or just, you have different communication styles or whatever. And, typically when an agent offers to sign with you, you'll get your 2 weeks to kind of like do your due diligence and like check with other agents. And they'll usually say, hey, chat to, my 2 clients and, see how they feel. But you're not getting the full picture because they're going to give you the clients that like love working with them and are having a great time. You're not necessarily going to see the perspective of the clients that are no longer with them or who have moved on, or maybe who aren't having a great time. And obviously that experience kind of can vary very dramatically depending on the relationship. So like somebody who's a rock star agent for one author might not be a great fit for another. So those whisper networks make it sound like there's this like anthill of like publishing and we're all like sharing trade secrets. It's kind of not
spraying
like
pheromones at each other.
That makes the mission more easy. Oh my goodness. But I think that's a good way to go. Just like talk to people about their experiences with their current agent and then see if that kind of gels with what you're looking for, because I think it's such a personal thing. And it is kind of like getting married on the first date. Like, somebody's like, I love your book, let's go. And then you're signing this contract. Also really read your contract, that if you get a contract from your agent to sign, and you're leaping into this thing, and it might be that, if it doesn't work out, you might still be attached to them for like a year or indefinitely if they sell a book with you. Well, so getting it right matters.
Yeah. And I mean, we've used the marriage analogy in other conversations, and I think it's a really important one. When you're taking the approach of I'm going to cold query someone, I'm in Query Manager. Yes, they're open and they rep picture books. That's very much getting married after the blind date. Mm-hmm. But I think what you're describing is more like we live in a polyamorous society, polyamorous publishing society. I can talk to this potential spouse's many other wives or husbands or whatever, just to see what their experience has been like. I think it's really important to work your relationships, work your network, and build friendships. I mean, your own work will strengthen from that experience. It not to write to an agent's spec necessarily, but it's really going to get a lot stronger, and you're going to understand the sensibilities of agents and editors without sort of operating in a vacuum.
Absolutely. Oh, those writing communities are so important. I think when I got started, it was like browsing forums back in the olden days, when forums were a thing. But like even then, like that was so valuable. And like now being able to chat with people at various stages of their careers, and who have vastly different experiences of publishing. Like some are New York Times bestsellers, and some have like a really cool like small press thing that they've worked like very collaboratively on, like hugely different experiences. And like all of those perspectives are so important. And I think everyone, the writing community is great, I think, because we're all suffering together. So
Totally.
there's definitely a sense of people like trying to lift each other up and like cheering each other on, because like we know how much work is involved, and it's like what you see out in the world is like the tip of the iceberg. Like there's like a Titanic crashing iceberg underneath like everyone, like we've all worked so hard for so long. And so, yeah, those communities, I think, are so valuable. Like whether it's like on Twitter, just very selectively use mute, block, Twitter lists. That's how I do it, so I don't go wild and just lose my mind. And Discord's been really great for that as well. And even just like little email groups or like people you catch up with in person. Like I don't really have that luxury because I live in the middle of nowhere. But whatever kind of works for you, I think, yeah, if you can have those like writer buddies, it really, really helps.
And I want to I have one more Ebony quote, because I feel like she knows the industry so well, and chatting with her was so just helpful and beneficial and just sort of blew my mind. And the other thing that comes to mind is she was like, you have to be willing to say no. Like, are you prepared to turn down an offer on this book if it's not, working with the editor or the publisher or whoever that you think is going to be the best fit? And when she asked me that, because I won a critique from her, which is how I had all these chats with her. And she was like, look, if you're, let me ask you a question. Are you willing to say no? If somebody offers on this today, like, would you say no? And I was like genuinely shocked and a little bit stunned for a minute, because I was like, I mean, who says no? Like, right? Like what? Like what? And then she elaborated, and I was like, no, you're 100% right. Like I have to be in a place where I think that my work, that I believe in it, so much. And I think that my work is, so valuable that yes, I am willing to turn down an offer in its favor because I don't think this is the right one. And so I think that, getting to a place like that is also really helpful in sort of like arming yourself when you go into the query trenches, right? Or you're, sending stuff out to anybody. You have to just be in a good place with your work and not be willing to like, take every single critique or, say yes to whoever offers on your book, even if you don't think it's a good fit. So.
Absolutely. I think that's also good for like the writing community as a whole. I know we were on the Discord chat, there was somebody who had, I think, tentatively received an offer as an author illustrator, and they were saying, what is the lowest amount that I should be able to take? And it was basically like, well, how much money do you need to live on for the next 6 months?
Right.
And if you can't eat, if you're turning down other work, or you can't feed yourself, like, you're going to have to say no to the offer because you're doing yourself a disservice. And I think that if enough people start to say no to terms like that, it benefits all of us.
Agree. Yeah.
It drives up costs, obviously, like we get paid more. And I think coming from like the copywriting side of things, where I do just say no to bad client work now, like I'm in a position there where I can be like, I'm not working for that, or I'm not doing that project. I can say no. Whereas people taking on those projects at a very low rate or with very poor terms kind of end up undercutting everybody else. Like they're not just doing themselves a disservice. They're saying, okay, this is actually what you can get away with paying for this work. Whereas I think if you come at it saying, well, this is my value, this is what I bring to the table, it's kind of good for everybody. Like we can start to drive things up. Don't know that we're all there yet, but I think they're kind of important conversations to have. And I know everybody kind of tiptoes around money in publishing because it's kind of not the done thing. But I feel like 99% of the conversations I have are about money.
Totally. I mean,
it's the biggest mystery. Mm-hmm.
It
is.
Really
and it's so variable because I feel like because nobody talks about it, nobody knows what to expect or what to ask for, or that you can ask for, X, Y, and Z. Or maybe you can't ask for that from this publisher because, their budget only goes to here. So if you're willing to take that and you can take their ceiling offer, like that's fine. Otherwise, you need to be able to say no and move on to someone who can pay you. Like these are all things that I feel like you only find out like the longer that you're in it. And I just wanted to say one other thing about saying no. Publishers say no all the time, right? Editors say no all the time. Why can't we say no? Like right? Like I want to say yes, I do, but I feel like taking back that power and being able to say no on my behalf is like a little bit of it's really empowering to be like, no, like, I don't want your crappy offer, you know, like, I deserve more and I should be paid more for the work that I put into this, right?
You're not
like,
putting anybody on blast to be.
No, I mean, no offense to, I mean, I'm not saying anything specific. It's just, you know, like, it's not fair that they're the only ones who get to say no. Like, this is my work. I should be able to say no, right? And that is my right, and it's within my power, and it should be more easy for us to say no, and that we're not gonna.
I smell a Kidlit Writers Guild of America brewing.
So, that would be amazing. I keep saying we need a union.
Oh boy!
I am a member of the Authors Guild, but yes,
right,
definitely.
Right.
Yeah. But I also think, like, saying no, there will come a point, because, like, you know, I have quite a big year ahead of me next year. And there is a point where it's like, there comes a point in your career where it's like, well, you are going to have to say no to some things because you have so many projects on the go that it's like, well, it has to be worth my time. And so, like, I think I have another couple of books due this year. And then once I'm in edits and promoting things, and then it's like, well, part of the reason I haven't queried is because I'm still working on contracted stuff. So I don't necessarily have new things. Because I've been, like, working on those deadlines for the past, like, year or two.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like a really interesting thing of, like, well, I'm, like, booked up for the next, like, 2, maybe 3 years with, like, marketing and sales and promotion and edits and all of that sort of stuff, so that if something comes through and it's going to be like a year of work for me, it has to kind of be worth it. And it definitely depends on the type of book and the type of creative that you are. Like, some are more time consuming than others, or require more work than others. More of your time versus, rather, not more of your work. But yeah, so it's definitely something to consider. Like, do I want to write 10 novels a year for $5,000 each? Probably not. You know,
Right.
Some people can kind of do that. Like, they write really fast, and maybe they're self-publishers and need to kind of work on that kind of production schedule. But for a lot of people, that's not doable. So, like, it definitely becomes like a time where you're, like, making those decisions about, well, do I need to turn this down so I can work on this other project, or do I work really hard for a year and then take a few years off? It kind of depends on what works for you. But yeah, saying no, it's a very good skill to have. I feel like we learn it really late in life too.
Totally.
Like, I'm only just starting to be able to say no, and I'm like, man, I'm getting old now. I've got grey hair. But I can say it. 2-letter word, and I can say it. Yes.
So I'm going to ask a question that has been answered for the past 10 minutes, but bears sort of emphasizing. You know, as a person who has manuscripts that I would love to have published, my nebulous goal is get a book published. And so what I'm interested in for both of you, I mean, Brenna, you've got a deal that you've made, and Steph, you've got a super busy year that's coming up, is this notion of setting yourself measurable goals, specific measurable goals as a writer. How, like, myself, who is on the journey toward publication, what is it that I would say no to? And I think that you're pulling that apart in terms of, like, what commitment is this going to require of me? What is it going to take away from my life? What is it going to add to or what does it need to add to my life in the context of, you know, the complication that it's going to require? It's not just, I want to get a book published, because it's so much more complicated than that. I'll rephrase my observation and say, like, do either of you, I'm going to interview both of you now, do either of you set those specific goals for yourself? Do you know, going into a project or a query or a submission or whatever, you know, what your threshold is or what your capacity is?
Yeah, I'm definitely starting to get to that point now, because I work from, like, picture books all the way through to middle grade, and I'm working on some screenplays as well, because why not?
Cool.
So I have to be, and obviously I'm cutting back on my client work, but that's still, pays probably 50% of the bills at this stage. So I just have to be mindful of that as well. Like, I can't get to a point where I'm just turning down client work, because, like, all of my client work, 'cause I have a few consistent clients. So if I start saying no to them all the time, then my bread and butter's gone as well. So that's also a factor. I think, like, for you with, like, the notion of having a book published, you know, they say it's, you know, better to be published well than just to be published. But I think it depends on what that means for you. So, like, I have a ton of small press books out that up front, like, I, you know, didn't receive large advances for them or anything, but the books are absolutely beautiful. They're in bookshops, they're in libraries, they've been translated, they're kind of in different formats, they've been animated and things like that as well. And over the years, they've actually like, I mean, they're not making like life-changing money, but like they're doing pretty well for like a small press book. And so I would consider those to be published well, even though they're not necessarily like New York Times #1 bestseller, like in all the Scholastic Book Club or whatever. But I think it depends on like what your goals are. And then do you want your books to be your career? Because some people don't. Some people are like, I'd like to do a picture book every couple of years, and it's a thing that I love to do, but it will always be like a thing that I do on the side. Because when it becomes your career, like your full-time job, it's kind of the questions start to become very different, because
the hustle
say
is
yes and no to very different things. So
right, exactly.
Yeah, the hustle is real. Like the hustle is, oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm always driving around everywhere, flogging my books and like
throwing them out, like
basically.
Yeah, Shameless.
Yeah. Like I'm at events most weekends and stuff like that. So it gets really busy really quickly. So I guess it depends on like, your goals as a creator as well. Like if you want it to be a full-time thing, then that's something to think about. You probably don't need to think about that. I mean, you might hit the jackpot, but you probably don't need to think about that too much until like a couple of books in. But it starts to get really busy really fast. So I guess it's a personal.
I want to anchor onto this point that you're making with a relatively recent example. I mean, I don't know if it'll be recent as of time of publishing, but we'll reference it anyway. I mean, Lewis and Tabitha has been out in the world for years now, and you recently observed like that the publisher sold the foreign rights to a couple of different countries, which is fascinating to me. I mean, but that's
very exciting.
That to me is an example of this, what was a relatively small boutique publisher really backing your work and continuing to work on it years after the deal was done. Is that something that you knew and expected going into the deal, that it would be published well to that extent?
Maybe not to that extent. Like I knew that, so at the time Familius were relatively new. I knew that they did beautiful books, and they'd had a few New York Times bestsellers, Made for Me, which is just sold and sold and sold. It's incredible. It's everywhere. When I received Lewis and Tabitha, I was blown away by how beautiful it is. It is absolutely gorgeous. The jacket's got spot gloss and foiling, and the illustrations are by Holly Mengert, who's a pretty well-known Disney artist, and she's done the Sparkleton books and lots of other things. She's wonderful. I kind of had high expectations, but I was blown away with what a good job they did. One of the big focuses at Familius is the backlist. So instead of throwing a few titles at the wall every 3 months or whatever and hoping that some of them sell, they really, really focus on continuing to sell their backlist. And I think that's definitely what we've seen with the foreign rights there. So every year, DropCap, which is a foreign rights agency they work with, they go to all the major festivals around the world, and they're constantly like bringing out those backlist titles. So they do continue to sell. So yeah, I was kind of surprised because I didn't actually know about the foreign rights sale until like the Spanish publisher tagged me, and I was like, this is cool. This is great. But yeah, so it's on Books as well. And I just saw today that it's in Spanish now on Books. Books has a Spanish edition. I don't know if you don't know what Books is, they basically do animated versions of picture books. So they still have the text, they still have the narration, but they have a soundtrack. And then the animations move. They're absolutely beautiful.
So fun.
I was really stoked to see that.
That's really cool.
It's really, so it's definitely like their long-term focus has been wonderful for me. So I know Quacks came out end of last year, but I know that even in like 5 years, like it will still be getting the push that I'm really glad it's had. So it's really nice to know that your books just haven't been put out there and somebody hopes that they work, and then if they don't, that's the end of them. Oh, actually, I do have one book. I won't say what it is. Won't name the publisher.
Redacted.
So I did have one book that it was kind of a rip from the headlines kind of book. And I thought it did really well. It got really good reviews. And it came out, I'm kind of giving myself away. It came out just before COVID. And I thought it had done pretty well. Because when I would take it to events, it would just like sell and sell and sell. And it sold through its print run. So I was like, this is great. But during COVID, it received too many returns from bookstores because obviously bookstores were closed. So returns were a thing. And that was the end of the book. So it's now out of print. And I found out when I went to order more copies of the book for a school visit. And they were like, we're sorry, we only have, 5 copies left. And then we're not reprinting it. And it was just one of those moments of like, oh wow, so this was with a different publisher, and it was just like such a different business model of like, if it right out of the gate isn't, you know, a huge bestseller, we're going to pull back on the marketing. Whereas I think Familius is very much like slow burn, like it's great if it's a New York Times bestseller, but they will just keep investing in those books for years to come. So it's definitely two very different experiences.
Can you, Steph, just real quick, so can we back up to the foreign rights part? So, because I think, so even, I have a very, like, minimal understanding of foreign rights.
So do I.
Yeah. Well, so so I guess my question is, like, I understand what foreign rights are, but I am fuzzy on where the department sort of lies, or like whose jurisdiction that's in. So for instance, with Familia, so they have a foreign rights department, correct? So
they have an agency that they work with.
Agency that they work with. Okay. So so I don't know if this is hypothetical or not. So when you sold your book to them, if you were unagented, so does Familius, the publication, take care of the foreign rights on your behalf? Or alternately, if you were agented, does the agent take care of that at the agency? Like, do you know how that works?
So it's one of those it depends questions. So it depends on, so with Lewis and Tabitha, I sold world rights to Familius. So they then have the responsibility to sell into different territories, and then I'll get a cut of that when that happens. If I were to sell, say, North American English language rights to Familius, and then I retain all of the other rights, then I or my agent will be the ones responsible for selling it into different territories. So it kind of depends on the rights it does depend on the rights that were sold at the time. Some publishers are like very aggressive about selling those foreign rights. It sometimes depends on how successful a book has been. You know, will they make the effort for a book that's kind of performed middlingly well? Whereas you'll often see, you've probably seen the ones in Publishers Weekly or whatever, where it's like North American rights and they list like 50 different countries that the rights are sold to.
Yeah, right. So, or world rights belong to blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Right. And so I've seen that. I'm familiar with the verbiage, but I'm like, well, what does that actually mean?
So it depends. So sometimes, because picture books, you have the author component and the illustrator component. Usually, sometimes the author and the illustrator are the same, or sometimes the illustration might be owned by the publishing house if they do it all in-house. Kind of depends. Often you'll end up selling world rights, just because with the illustrator component it kind of gets complicated to sell foreign rights, because you would need to loop in their agent because they still have the rights, the illustration rights to the foreign languages. So often you would sell world rights to a publisher if it's a picture book, but not always. And I'm not a lawyer and I am not an agent, so I might be totally wrong, but that has been my experience.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I wasn't trying to put you on the spot with like, this is what you should do. I was curious because Familius had sold the Spanish rights. And so I was just wondering, about what, keeping it in-house for the agency or having the publisher have the rights. But either way, yeah. So that sheds some light on foreign rights. So thanks.
It's kind of been interesting. So Italian and Spanish rights sold there to the same house, I think, which is kind of interesting. But so we retain things like film rights and all of that sort of stuff. But books, so they're like an animated version of a book, but they have their own separate rights class, so it doesn't count as film rights or TV rights or anything.
Interesting.
I don't even know what it is. It's like they have their own like separate rights carved out. So that was like a separate thing that I guess the publisher still retained, because I didn't have it down in my contract as this type of right because I didn't know it existed. So I didn't retain the right to that. The publisher owned that one. So it was kind of like an interesting thing. It gets very complicated, and there are so many different rights that like when you dig into a contract, you're like, amusement park rights. Oh yeah.
Yeah, right. Like I'd like some of those. Yeah, let's do this.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting. And obviously like, typically it's in your interest to like retain as many rights as you can, and therefore you can go out and sell them, because generally, like say your agent would be typically more aggressive about like selling the rights versus like a publisher who may or may not have an incentive to sell them based on the performance of your book. But it depends. It kind of depends on the house. It depends on their publishing model. Probably depends on like their reach and the kind of book that you've written. So it's kind of one of those really hard industries because it's like, it depends.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Because if you sell a book and you're unagented, also, right, you don't really have. I mean, I guess I could keep my rights and try to sell them, but like I don't know how to do that, right? So it would. So it seems like, you know, at least if the publishing house has an agency that they work with, and it is possible to have the rights sold, like okay, but you know.
Exactly.
So,
sometimes it can be a less of a headache. Like, but yeah, you could potentially go out and sell like Turkish rights or whatever. Like, you could do
Or
it.
your amusement park rights. Yeah.
Or amusement park rights. That's my goal.
I love that. I love the reality of amusement park rights. Six Flags, here I come.
I think that'll be. So I'm like, I love cats at Six Flags. That's going to be great. Yeah. But yeah, it's a really interesting one. Like the contracts get so interesting because I have a contract that I think is coming through next week, and it's going to be me doing it, maybe with some help from the Authors Guild. So it's going to be interesting to see. It's with a different press I haven't worked with before, but it'll be interesting to see like whether they like how similar their contract is to other publishers I've worked with, or whether I need to get some external representation. So it's going to be interesting. So, but, yes, I will be a lawyer for a while.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do it like a man, Steph. Do it like a man.
Right. I'll put on my Jimmy McGill suit and yeah.
Oh, Jimmy McGill! I'm so excited for that new season. We haven't started it yet.
We finished it last night.
Oh, don't. Okay, no spoilers.
I won't spoil it.
We're talking about Better Call Saul.
Oh, I was going to say I have no idea.
It's a great children's book. Yeah.
Yeah, right, Jimmy McGill. You know.
It's a children's book about a corrupt lawyer.
Yeah, right. There's an amusement park coming out next year, Josh. Didn't you hear? Rights were sold.
Yeah. That would make a great amusement park, right? Yeah.
I think I'm still on season 5 of Breaking Bad. So.
Oh my gosh, you didn't tear through that? Oh
No.
my gosh, Breaking Bad is so good.
Yeah, I think Better Call Saul is better.
Oh my gosh, it's so good. It's so good.
It's really good. I know. I'm always 5 years behind on anything. I was just catching up on like pandemic era TV the other day, where like they just start to mention like masks, and you realize that the actors in the scene go from like 20 people in a scene to like 2 people in a room really far apart, and you're like, I was like, oh wow, such is life.
They
with,
don't
like,
breathe on each other. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Kind of mumbling. But yeah, I'm always really behind on like any media, or it's so difficult juggling everything.
Because
like I sat down the other day.
You're too busy
read a book
analyzing contracts and selling foreign rights.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and selling books. I mean,
there seriously is a point where it's like, okay, I'll write in the morning, and then I have to do my day job stuff, and then finally get my toddler down to bed, and then I have to write, and you're like, wow, it's really hard because obviously you do need to be reading a ton. Not even just to be a writer, but because it's the best hobby in the world. But it's so hard to stay on top of like everything that's coming out, particularly if you read across like multiple genres and categories. And it's like, oh my gosh, yeah. I'm like, have you discovered this little known book that it was like a bestseller in like 1949 or something? Like that's how far behind I am.
You're like, no, what is this?
And it's kind of interesting to be like, oh, all these books have just gone out, and I just had no idea. And particularly like pandemic era books, there was a thread recently on Twitter where they were like, hey, here are all these great books that came out in 2020, and so many of them looked amazing, and I hadn't heard of any of them. And it was just, I think it's just so easy for things to get lost at the moment. But yeah, we're trying to buy it all and read it all and borrow it all, and but it's a lot.
It's all a lot.
Well, we're like up and over the hour already, Steph. So
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. No, I was just gonna say, is there anything we haven't covered that you want to tell us about, or do you have something on the horizon you want to push out or tell people where to find you?
It's so interesting because I'm not even sure what I'm allowed to say.
I know, right? The redacted. Find Steph Campisi, but also redacted. We can't talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I have a few projects that I'm really excited about, but I'm not allowed to share. I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say.
That's such a bummer, right?
Picture book coming out in a crate, those subscription crates.
Oh yeah, cool.
But I don't know if I can talk about that.
Just vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, I guess what it's. Yeah, vaguely, vaguely. It's about a topic my son's really into, and I got to dedicate it to him, so that's
Oh,
great.
cool.
Because there's this thing, like he grows so fast, and picture books and books take so long that I'm like, oh, by the time this ends up on shelves, he's going to be in like high school.
Right,
So
and he's not
I
going to
was
care
so
anymore.
excited that like the time frame on this one was pretty short, so I'm like, yes, he's still into this topic.
Yeah.
And it should be within the next like 3 months. And then I guess I am allowed to vaguely talk about my middle grade novel that comes out at the end of the year, just in generalities. It will come out in Germany,
Oh.
which is an interesting one. I'm not actually sure if it will be available in English yet.
Oh my gosh. How did
Whoa.
that happen?
At the very end, didn't I? Yeah,
Yeah. Leave us on a cliffhanger.
yeah, I cliffhanger because I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say about that one yet. But that's an interesting story, and hopefully
I will have
did
to have you.
follow up with the publisher to ask what I was allowed to say.
We'll have to have you back on then.
Haven't heard anything.
For
so.
for part 2 for the sequel, the German sequel.
Yes.
Because I mean, what? Like I have so many questions.
So I do as well. So it should be really interesting. So I don't know what that entails for me if I have to like travel or if I have to.
How cool would
I
that
don't
be
know.
though if you did have to travel?
I mean, I would absolutely not complain at all. I'm there.
Yeah.
I'm on the plane right now. But yeah, so that's going to be an interesting one. I kind of wish I could say more about it because it's kind of an interesting, weird foot in the door kind of thing. And then a chapter book series that I also can't say much about that will come out next year as well. So that's my
Oh my
first
gosh.
foray into chapter books. And it's the most fun I've ever had writing anything. Oh my gosh. They let me keep all my best/worst jokes.
Oh, I'm so excited.
So yeah.
That's
Very
advice that we
cool.
got straight from Amy Dykman. Try the crazy because they might like it or they
Yes.
might
Yeah.
underline it.
Usually they say no, but I feel like the one in the subscription crate let me keep my best joke. Yes, it's terrible. It's my worst joke ever, and they let me keep it. And yes, this series as well. I feel like go for it. Sometimes they'll just be like, "What are you thinking?" And they'll cut it, or they'll be like, "This is really Australian. Nobody's going to understand this." So I always have to cut every reference to chook, which is a chicken in Australian. So my mission in life is to get the word chook into a book.
Maybe you should just name the book Chook, right?
yes.
Like start
Chook
with
the
that
book.
and be like, look, if you take it
Chook
out,
the book.
the whole book falls apart. Like it is
Exactly.
integral,
Yeah.
right?
Otherwise, chicken the beacon doesn't work as well as chook the book, does it? So,
Yeah, right.
but yes, there's a lot of stuff. But I'm always like tweeting about stuff very vaguely, sometimes less vaguely. So you're welcome to find me on the Twitters at Steph Campisi. That there may or may not be Steph from the Bronx.
Right.
May or may not have a similar
Oh,
handle.
stuff from the Bronx.
I think she does have the TikTok because somebody like tried to follow me on TikTok. I'm not on TikTok.
If
and they're
she's
like,
on
yeah.
Twitter, I'm going to tag her in this episode because she should
Yes,
know
please.
about
She's like-
her doppelganger out in the world.
It was really strange. But yeah, so I'm mostly on the Twitters. People are welcome to email me if they have any questions or whatever.
that's really
I
sweet.
think I'm kind of vaguely on Instagram and Facebook, but not in any real way.
Yeah.
But yeah,
We'll see you on
so,
Discord.
yeah.
Hey, I have a parting.
Yeah.
I have a very personal parting question that is important for people who listen to this interview and then go and check out your books from the library or whatever. How do you feel about people who read Quacks Like a Duck out loud to their kids or to audiences or whatever? How do you feel about them doing Australian accents for Petunia?
Oh, I love it. Please do your very worst Australian accent. Oh my gosh, please do it. So I read this Kirkus review for, thankfully not for one of my books, but it was for a very well-known children's picture book that is about a French animal. I won't like give away the name or whatever, but you probably know what I'm talking about. And the review said it. It said it disparagingly that it would encourage people to do a really bad French accent. That's the best part. So yes, please do your very worst Australian accents. Watch some Bluey, like really get into it.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes.
You're big. I have like a really Aussie Australian accent that I like put on when I read Quacks. It's called being a bogan, so I'm a bogan when I read that. Bogans kind of wear like blue denim and like have mullets and stuff.
Oh, I
and
love
listen to
that.
The deep south of
a
Australia.
YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, be a bogan, and yes, please. I would love you to do an Australian accent, even if it sounds like a South African or a New Zealander. It's all good.
Josh, you're going to have to add that to your repertoire then.
It's very valid.
Australian
Someone-
accent,
okay.
NPR, Sleepy Time, Library.
Someone send in a shout out for the podcast where I get to do like my best impression of Rocco from Rocco's Modern Life or something.
Oh,
Yes, I love Rocco.
Rocco's Modern
Right?
Life. Yes.
Is it going to be one of us? One of us is going to send in the shout out and be like,
right.
please do this in your Rocco's
I'm
Modern
going to
Life
do that
voice.
right now. Yeah.
Yeah, and just so you know,
Oh my
this episode
gosh.
is not going to end in me doing my Australian accent. It has to be on a separate recording where I can do multiple takes. So, we'll leave that for later.
Oh, we expect it.
Oh my gosh.
We'll come back for part 2.
Yeah.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes.
Yeah.
Steph, thank you so much for coming on. This has been like so much fun and so informative, and I just thank you for sharing all of your knowledge and your vague information, but also your specific information. Both
your-
have been
And
very
your
delightful.
hustle and your yeah.
But yeah, well, everyone listening, thank you for listening, and thank you for having me, Josh and Brenna.
Of course.
And yeah, go out there and do the thing. Be shameless.
That's right.
Yes, I love it.
I love
Not
that.
too shameless. Shameless within reason.
Thanks for listening this week.
Find all of our episodes and other associated links and information at linktree.com/verseshow.
Or reach out to us on Twitter. Thanks again, and we'll see you next verse.
Bye.